They say everything happens for a reason, but not every reason feels fair when it hits you. I'm Eliza, born in 1991 in the quiet town of Mayfield. Back in 2022, my grandmother Margaret passed away and left behind two things: a beach house for my sister Vanessa, and a rusty old Buick for me. I felt invisible, discarded, but then something happened that changed my life. Today at 34, I'm finally sharing this because someone out there might be holding pain that was never theirs to carry. If you're listening, drop your city or your feelings below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You matter. The day of the will reading felt more like an execution than a family gathering. Grandma Margaret had barely been gone a week, and yet the tension in the lawyer's office was thicker than fog. My sister Vanessa sat across from me, designer shades still on indoors, tapping her French-tipped nails against the wooden table like she was counting down to her inheritance. My husband, Malcolm, stood behind me with crossed arms and barely veiled irritation. When the lawyer said, "To Eliza, I leave my 1986 Buick Electra," Malcolm scoffed audibly. "A car? That rust bucket in the garage." And then came the real sting to Vanessa. "I leave the beach house in Coral Springs." Malcolm's hand tightened on my shoulder. Vanessa smirked like she expected it all along. "Ich sett frozen." Numb. I loved Grandma Margaret deeply. We were closer than anyone knew, but I couldn't help but feel like I'd been left behind. All I got was a car that hadn't moved in 5 years and had a family of spiders living in the back seat. The ride home from the lawyer's office was silent. Malcolm didn't say a word until we pulled into our driveway. "You embarrassed me in there," he snapped, slamming the car door behind him. "I didn't write the will," I said quietly, heart pounding. "You think I'm going to keep living paycheck to paycheck while Vanessa basks in ocean views? We've got bills, Eliza. And your grandmother gives you a trash can on wheels. Don't talk about her like that," I murmured, but my voice didn't carry any strength. He stepped closer. "You always let people walk all over you, including her. Maybe if you weren't such a doormat, we wouldn't be in this mess." That night, he packed a bag and told me to stay elsewhere until I could figure out what to do with my junk. I slept in the old Buick. The air inside the Buick was thick with dust and the faint scent of peppermint, the kind Grandma Margaret always kept in her purse. I turned the key. The engine choked, then started. That surprised me more than anything else had in weeks. It ran. I sat there, tears slipping silently down my cheeks, hands on the steering wheel like they were holding the last bit of my dignity. I didn't have anywhere to go, no one to call. Vanessa hadn't even texted me since the will reading. I opened the glove compartment to find a faded envelope. My name was written in Grandma's cursive. "My dear Eliza," the letter began, "I know you're wondering why I left you the car. You always look deeper than the surface. That's why you were the only one who saw me not just as a grandmother, but as a woman with a life before motherhood. This car holds the pieces of that story, the truth, and yes, something more." My hands trembled. "In the trunk is a leather bag. You'll need to take your time with it. And remember, don't trust Vanessa with what you find." I jumped out of the car and rushed to the trunk. The key stuck a little but finally turned. Inside was a dusty brown leather bag, fraying at the edges, and beneath it, a small gray metal safe with an old-fashioned combination lock. The bag itself was heavy. I carried it into the front seat like it might fall apart in my hands. Inside the bag were photographs, black and white, some tinted with age. Men in uniform. Letters with curled edges. Military records in Grandma's name, except she had a different last name back then. Margaret Shaw, not Margaret Haynes. There were letters from soldiers. Ones that said thank you. Ones that talked about fear and hiding and survival. One even said, "You saved my life, Maggie. Gold is safer with you than anyone I know." My heart started to race. Gold. I dug deeper. A small, tattered diary was tucked between two old envelopes. The handwriting was Grandma's, but younger, loopier. I started reading. March 14th, 1945. I agreed to hide it today. Said it was for safekeeping until the war ended. Mr. Collins was desperate and I couldn't say no. My fingers gripped the pages tighter. May 2nd, 1945. They never came back for it. I still have it. God help me. I looked down at the safe. That had to be it. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I sat in the car reading every word of Grandma's diary until the sun peeked over the rooftops. She hadn't just lived through a war, she had saved people, hidden valuables, risked her life. And now, I had it. I had her truth. But I didn't have the combination. After a hot shower at a public gym and some much-needed coffee, I drove the Buick carefully to the Mayfield Historical Society. The curator, Mr. Jameson, was in his 60s, wearing a bow tie and reading glasses perched at the end of his nose. I need help, I said, showing him the bag, the diary, and the safe. My grandmother's name was Margaret Shaw. She hid something. During the war. Within 20 minutes, he had pulled up old files. We've heard stories like this, he said. Women who weren't recognized as war heroes because they weren't on the front lines. But this is different. This is real. Together, we cracked the safe. I had guessed the combination was her birthday, May 12, 1921. Inside were rows of gold coins and bars, each stamped with a crest I didn't recognize. There were also more letters sealed and one final note addressed to whoever finds this. You are now the keeper of truth. Mr. Jameson turned to me, stunned. This could change our understanding of local wartime history. It could even connect to families who thought their legacies were lost. I looked down at the coins. I thought of Malcolm, of Vanessa. And I realized for the first time in a long time, I had something that didn't need to be sold or shared or stolen. I had a purpose. For 3 days, I lived out of the Buick like it was a sacred temple. I'd park behind the museum after closing hours, wrapped in a blanket, eating instant noodles and thinking about how my whole life had been a string of expectations wrapped around disappointment. And yet, here I was a guardian of something real. Something buried in history, sealed in a safe, and carried on 4 rusty wheels by a woman the world never truly knew. Mr. Jameson offered to store the gold under museum care for security reasons, and I agreed. But I made it clear. I'm not selling any of it. I'm not cashing in. This is hers. This is history. He nodded. Then let's honor it right. Soon, the museum's entire research team got involved. The gold's markings matched a missing wartime shipment that had vanished en route to a businessman trying to escape the country's chaos. Grandma Margaret Shaw was the last person on record to have been in contact with him. Each artifact was catalogued. Each letter was read aloud in private sessions, where I sat quietly, letting tears drip down my cheeks as I listened to war stories written in my grandmother's careful hand. I hadn't heard from Vanessa in weeks until I did. The call came while I was in the museum's archive room. I stepped outside to answer it, heart racing. Her voice was syrupy sweet, but I knew her well enough to hear the acid underneath. Eliza, darling, she said. Malcolm told me about your discovery. How exciting. I said nothing. Look, I was thinking. Since we're family, maybe we should split the values. I mean, a beach house is one thing, but gold, Eliza? That changes everything. You got exactly what Grandma wanted you to have, I said flatly. There was a pause. Are you really going to let this tear us apart? I almost laughed.
No, Vanessa.
You already did that. She hung up. 10 minutes later, Malcolm called too. This time he was too polite. Said he missed me. Said he was wrong. Said maybe we could talk. You kicked me out because I wasn't useful anymore. I said, staring out at the street. That's not fair.
No, Malcolm.
What's not fair is thinking love depends on what someone gives you in a will. The museum scheduled an unveiling exhibit for The Hidden Heroine of Mayfield. I stood in the hall, beside a glass case where Grandma's diary lay open to the page that read, "No one remembers the women who waited, who hid, who carried. But maybe one day they will." There were photos of her in the 1940s, her eyes sharp, her smile proud. There were also photos of the Buick, the safe, and one corner of the room recreated her tiny wartime flat with exact precision. I stood there for hours. People came and went. Some cried. Some stared in wonder. A child whispered to his mom, "She looks like a superhero." And in that moment, I realized I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't the sister with nothing. I was the only one who saw Grandma. The only one she trusted. When I stepped outside for air, a woman touched my arm. "Are you Eliza?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Yes. I'm Beatrice Collins. My grandfather was the man your grandmother helped. I've spent years trying to trace what happened to the gold. This means everything." We cried together, hugged like family. She called me her angel, but I knew the real angel had already done her work. I got a job as a nurse assistant at a nearby elder care center. It wasn't glamorous, but it filled me up in a way I hadn't felt in years. The patients smiled when I walked in. They told me stories. I listened. I didn't feel small anymore. I felt planted. One day, Vanessa showed up at the center. She wore no makeup. Her eyes were puffy. For a second, I didn't recognize her. "I came to talk," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I took my break and we sat outside on a bench under a jacaranda tree. "I thought having more would make me happy," she said. "The house, the money, the parties. But I'm alone. And when I saw what Grandma gave you, I realized I never really had her." "She tried," I said, swallowing my anger. "I know. I didn't. I was busy showing off. You were busy showing up." We sat in silence. "I'm sorry," she whispered. And that time, I believed her. Months passed. The exhibit became permanent. School groups came in buses. Veterans visited. Reporters wrote articles titled, "The Brave Woman in the Buick." I was interviewed too. I told them what I knew. Not the gold, not the scandal, but the quiet courage of a woman who never asked for credit, just kept doing what was right. Mr. Jameson eventually offered me a job at the museum as a community educator. I said yes. Malcolm filed for divorce and moved on. I didn't miss him. I missed who I thought he was. Vanessa and I spoke every week now. She even came to volunteer at the elder care center. Slowly, we became sisters again, not by blood, but by choice. And the Buick? It still sits in my driveway, polished now with fresh seats and a little plaque on the dashboard that says, "To Eliza, because she always saw me." They say blood is thicker than water, but truth is heavier than gold. And real love isn't about what you get. It's about what you carry when no one's looking.
Moral lesson.
When we honor the quiet sacrifices of those before us, we discover not just history but healing. Strength often hides in overlooked places. Never underestimate your worth. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Drop a comment. What would you have done with the gold?